if you're called to marriage, you're not going to be handed a rule of life on your wedding day that tells you when to pray. Like you need to be, at morning prayer at 6:15 and breakfast at 8 and then your work and then vespers at 5 and whatever, like religious are. You're going to have to structure your life, right? And the art of discipline, Jason, that you have cultivated, I think is a secret weapon for being able to balance prayer and time with your spouse and time with your kids and time with work to feed your family, right? And recreation and leisure. I just feel like you've tapped into something incredible and you've cultivated something incredible. So that's what I want to talk about. And I think it's going to be so beneficial to all of you who are discerning marriage because you've given yourself the luxury of time to cultivate this stuff too. Hello. It's Elizabeth Busby here, the Director of Programs for the Theology of the Body Institute. Thank you so much for joining me for this Discerning Marriage podcast. I have an incredibly special guest today, and I cannot wait for this conversation. And I cannot wait for you to get to watch this conversation. Please join me in welcoming Jason Evert. Hi, Jason.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
I want to talk about something that's a little bit different than kind of maybe your typical shtick, Jason, when it comes to chastity, dating, engagement, that kind of thing. So I had the privilege of meeting Jason in person. The Theology of the Body Institute had this event called Revealed, and we brought a lot of really big voices in the church together to talk about theology of the body and what they were, like how it applies to their life and their work. It was incredible. There were I don't even know how many speakers there were, 6, 7, 8. And my job the whole weekend was to make sure the speakers were where they needed to be. So I would assign them a time and I would get there a couple minutes early and they'd be there or they wouldn't. And I have to track them down. And that was my job and it was great. But then Jason's time came, his slot came. I was like, okay, be at this place at this time. I show up a couple minutes early. He's already there. So I'm like, great, cool. Next time I show up like 5 to 10 minutes early. He's already there. I basically spent this entire segment, your entire segment, chasing you around because you were where you needed to be. And you were like, you had it figured out. You didn't need me at all. I was like running after him like, oh, gotta go where Jason already is. And it really stuck out to me, right? Like, obviously there were all these people who wanted to talk to you. There were all these people who were interested in like meeting with you, but you were so focused on where you needed to be and when you needed to be there, including prayer. Like at one point I was like, I need you to meet me here. And you were like, can you meet me in adoration first? Like, can you pick me up from there? Because that's where I'll be. It was really powerful for me to witness. And that was last May. Well, that was what, 8 months ago? I have not been able to stop thinking about this encounter with you. It was incredible. And as you and I finally like cornered you and was like, tell me your ways. Like, this is so impressive. And you said a couple really cool things about discipline and the role discipline has played in your life. And, I inferred a couple other things about how you apply that to your marriage and family. And I am excited to talk to you about this because for those of you who are discerning marriage, if you're called to marriage, you're not going to be handed a rule of life on your wedding day that tells you when to pray. Like you need to be, morning prayer at 6:15 and breakfast at 8 and then your work and then vespers at 5 and whatever, like religious are. You're going to have to structure your life, right? And the art of discipline, Jason, that you have cultivated, I think is a secret weapon for being able to balance prayer and time with your spouse and time with your kids and time with work to feed your family, right? And recreation and leisure. I just feel like you've tapped into something incredible and you've cultivated something incredible. And your ministry is huge and you have a lot to say and you have a very beautiful way of presenting it. But I just wonder how much of your ministry success has been because you have this disciplined approach, right? You've cultivated something. Yeah. Grace builds on nature. So you've cultivated something, you've tilled these fields. So when God sends the rain, it's like this abundant garden because you've done all this work. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what I want to talk about. And I think it's going to be so beneficial to all of you who are discerning marriage because you've given yourself the luxury of time to cultivate this stuff too. So I'm pumped to hear your secrets, Jason. What do you have to say after that, before I get in?
Well, I mean, I can't take, all the credit for this stuff. Like, I think part of it is how you're raised in a sense. My dad's a German father, a good, tender-hearted man, but, he's disciplined. He's punctual. Like I just grew up, mass is at 9. We're leaving the house at 8. We were on time for stuff. Like I never remember growing up being late for stuff because it was just understood. You're being respectful of other people's time by being punctual. By being late, you're saying my time's more important than your time. And so, we grew up kind of with that attitude and, I was an Eagle Scout. And so learned some discipline from there and the training there. But then doing 25 years of ministry, I've probably given 3,000 plus assemblies. And, we get probably between an hour and a half early to every talk that we do because there's so many things you got to line up. Okay, is the microphone working? Like sometimes we'll show up at a school and they're like, we have an assembly today? Who's in charge? He's not here. Where's the microphone? It's at camp. So you just have to prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. There's so many logistics that have to be in place. And I owe that to the kids that I'm speaking to. It's something that's I'm not going above and beyond. I mean, they deserve to get what we're offering, which is a presentation with a microphone that works, and that distractions have been removed. And so we just want to get that stuff put to the side, for sure. But it's been a tremendous blessing in terms of the ministry where we've got a lot of stuff going on between book publishing and website outreach and in-person assemblies and podcasts and this and that. If there wasn't discipline, ordering these things, it would just be a dumpster fire. And so to me, it's a real essential, component of being able to do what God's asking you to do. Not only doing it in an orderly way, but knowing what to say no to. I remember a priest once said to me, the most important word you have to learn how to say to be an effective apostle is no. No, I won't give that retreat. No, I won't write that book. No, I won't review that manuscript. No, because otherwise the ministry will cannibalize the family. And so we've got to make sure that our primary call to holiness is in our vocations, not outside of it. And that's obviously easier said than done, but that prioritization has to sink in.
Were you good at saying no? Is that something that your dad taught you too when you were growing up? Like, were you all good at saying no then, or did you have to cultivate that?
That one definitely took time because, before I was married, I was traveling, giving chastity talks, sometimes 28 days a month, where I'd get booked, come to our town for 2 weeks and, chastity talk. Then I'd fly to New York, fly over to here, come home, do my laundry, go to the gym, go surfing, get on the next airplane, go back. But hey, you're single. You can do whatever you want. But then with marriage and kids came a lot more discernment. Okay, well, how much can I be away? How much is healthy? How much is unhealthy? And so we've come to this rule that I'll travel up to 8 or 9 days a month, but no more than 2 nights at a time. So that way I'm home at least 23 days a month. And during summer, I'll typically only do 1 engagement per month, and that's it. And so if someone calls in and says, oh, but we've got this mega event, there's going to be 5,000 kids there. And, you look at the calendar, we already got 9 days. Okay, well, sorry, that month is full. Oh, but it's 5,000 kids. Oh, well, we'll pray for you guys. And if you want us to do it next year, we can plan that. Because if you don't do that, then what am I going to do? Go to Crystal. Oh, there's 1 more day. Can I just be gone 1 more day? And then it's on her. Like, okay, so do I basically say, no, you can't leave? And then all these kids don't hear the message of chastity. So, but then I'm burnt out here with the kids. So either, what am I going to do? Either those kids are going to lose their virginity or I'm going to lose my sanity. I mean, something's going to get lost here, and it's just like, you have to guard, your spouse against the guilt of having to say no when you discern together and say, this is what the limit is. And then you tell that to the booking agent and you're free then.
Wow. Yeah, that freedom. What I'm hearing is there's so much freedom in being able to say that no. So that sounds like something you guys discerned together. Did Kristalina come in to the marriage with the same level of discipline focus as you, or is that something y'all have cultivated as a couple?
We've had to discern these things together because every couple is different. Like a friend of mine, his wife would rather he just get all the speaking done in 1 week and just be gone from the family and then come home for the rest of the month. Crystal likes more the short bursts, gone for 1 night, gone for 2 nights. That's it. The only exception we'll make to that is if it's like a pilgrimage or something. But even those months, I still won't travel more than 9 days. It's all just condensed in that trip and then nothing the rest of the month.
Wow. That is incredible. I love that. Okay, so when we spoke, one of the things, when I cornered you in the retreat center and I was like, tell me your magic ways. One of the things that you said was, I don't remember why Kobe Bryant was the person you picked, but I remember distinctly what you said. You said, if Kobe Bryant hustled so hard for his perishable glory, I should work even harder for my imperishable crown. And I was so struck by that. I then did Bible in a year and heard it in the Bible. But I still think the fact that you integrated it so well that it came out so spontaneously and you were like, this is the reason I do it. Why would I not hustle to be a saint harder than these athletes are hustling for the glory? Whew, that was powerful. I vividly remember that. So could you talk a little bit about how this discipline has affected, you mentioned a little about your personal life, but I'd still love to hear more, and also about your prayer life. How has this discipline, I guess, had an effect on your fight for your imperishable crown.
Yeah, no, I mean, with Kobe, I mean, it was beautiful with Kobe Bryant. His last meal before he passed away was the Blessed Sacrament. That's the last thing he had, was communion with his daughter before the helicopter crash. And so, obviously he had his ups and downs in life, and a Catholic priest helped him through some of the scandals in his own life. But, he was there. He was the kind of guy, first guy to practice to get there, last guy to leave. He was opening the gym and closing the gym. It was kind of the Mamba mentality. And I'll see that. I mean, tonight I'm going to the Phoenix Suns game with my kids. They're playing the Brooklyn Nets in town. And I coach our 7-year-old basketball team. And so we got passes to go to the game 2 hours before it starts. We get to go in and watch the players warm up. And so this is 2 hours before tip-off. These guys are going to be grinding and sweating and working hard, and we get to sit right courtside and watch all these guys work out. That's 2 hours before the 2-hour game. And, that doesn't include the physical training they're doing in the locker room beforehand, and afterwards the stretching and ice baths and all that stuff. And this is like, for what? I mean, this is to put a ball in a basket. Like that's the goal. And then you get a ring, if you win the championship. And so you look at that, and they kind of put us to shame. I mean, the level of discipline that even the lowest level professional athlete puts into their craft, because what you're watching when you're watching a basketball game, you're not really watching the game, you're watching their practice. You're watching what's under that iceberg of all the years of free throws they've shot with nobody watching, with no crowds. If there wasn't that underneath, there'd be nothing at the top. And so I think it's got to be the same thing in our own exterior works we're doing for the church. That's got to be the little part that peeks out. There has to be something a lot bigger than that underneath the surface if it's going to be stable. And so you look at someone like John Paul II, exteriorly, he did a lot of amazing stuff. I mean, traveled the distance from here to the moon 3 times, visited 129 countries to spread the gospel. I mean, they used to joke in the Vatican, what's the difference between God and Pope John Paul II? It's that God is in all places, but the Pope has already been there. And so this guy was not passive, but he was primarily interior, not exterior. And so I think we need to make sure that we're spending adequate amount of time working on our own interior life instead of focusing on success and doing an apostolic work. There was a priest through the Theology of the Body Institute, I remember, that told Christopher and the team, and he shared with me, the priest said, hyperactivity in the apostolic life is a sign of spiritual laziness. Like, sit on that. Like, hyperactivity in the apostolic life is a sign of spiritual laziness. The heavy lifting is done in the interior life. And that's the heavy work. That's the heavy lifting. And we need to be spending the lion's share in that world if we're going to be fruitful like John Paul II was.
So for someone who didn't have a dad that laid the foundation for this, right? I'm sure a lot of my listeners did not come from super disciplined homes. Maybe they're hearing this for the first time and they're super on board. Do you have any tips for developing this, for someone who doesn't come by it maybe more naturally?
Well, try to be around people who do it, because this you learn when you're with friends who aren't living a virtuous life and pursuing perfection. Typically what you see is their faults and your virtues. But when you hang out with people, who are pursuing a virtuous life, what you'll see are their virtues and your faults. It's like practicing a sport with people who are when I play the 7-year-olds at practice, I can crush those kids at basketball practice because they're 7. I don't get a lot better by doing that. But then, last Friday we played the dads against my son's high school varsity basketball team, and we had to play against high school varsity players as, middle-aged dads. That takes your game up a level. It's like, okay, we got to really grind this one out. And so same thing in a life of virtue. Find good people and just see how they're living their life. Because for me, that rubs off a lot. I remember talking to a friend the other day, and he's like, "Oh, do you remember Matt from college?" I'm like, "I know who he was. I didn't know him real well." And he said, "Yeah, man, I was talking to him the other day." He said, he gets up at 4:30 every morning, so he's got 2 hours of morning prayer before his wife and kids wake up. And I'm like, whoa. Look, I get up earlier than the family to pray, but it ain't 4:30, I'll tell you that. But it was just one passing line in that conversation, and that guy never will know it impacted me. But it's like, okay, how seriously am I taking my interior life? Another friend of mine, he said, you can judge how much a man loves his wife and kids by how much he guards his interior life of prayer. That's the measure of his love for his family. And it's like, whoa, because it's so true. Like, God is love. And if I'm not really invested in guarding my interior life, what kind of love is it I'm giving to my family?
Will you say that again, please?
Yeah,
The measure of a man.
of a man's love for his wife and children is the extent to which he guards his interior life of prayer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love hijacking quotes that belong to other people and pretending like I came up with it. But yeah, good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is incredible. So for someone who's never really cultivated a prayer life, if I have listeners who, again, are on board with this, but maybe don't even know where to start, do you have any recommendations for them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, first is Sunday Mass. You're probably already doing that. You should be going to confession, at least once a month. I mean, you want to start there with the basics. And then think of your day as kind of like a scattered bookshelf. What do you need to get it in order? You need bookends. And then things will be upright. And so morning prayer and evening prayer are the bookends of your day. Do you have one of those in place? Yeah, I got morning prayer. It's an Our Father. Okay, well, that's like, putting a marble up against the books. I mean, it's something there, but like, you need something that's going to be a little weightier. So get up at least 15 minutes early. And you think, well, oh my goodness, that means I need to get up at 6 or whatever. But think, well, do you use the snooze button? Okay, well, don't use the snooze button and get up 10 minutes earlier. And then you just bought yourself like 20 minutes of prayer right there. And so start with that. And it's, okay, well, what do I do? Because sometimes I'll pray and I just sit there and I'm like, okay, God, what do you want to say? And then I get distracted. It's a squirrel, and then you're distracted. So I'm not getting anything out of it and you give up. Well, you have a plan for your prayer. Okay, I'm gonna sit down and, there's different types of prayer in the catechism, whether it's prayer of thanksgiving or intercession, where we're petitioning for others, of adoration, of contrition, of telling God you're sorry. You could try out some of those different types of prayer. You could do the mass readings. You can get a little app on your phone. There's all kinds of good ones between Hallow and Universalis, Divine Office. So you could click on your little app. And then you just hit on the top and you just go right there, readings at Mass, and bam, there's today's gospel. And so you could, spend some time, Lectio Divina, thinking about the gospel. You could do Liturgy of the Hours, morning prayer, afternoon prayer, evening prayer, night prayer, where the church has already come up with this for you, because the ancient Jews prayed a version of the Liturgy of the Hours at the time of Christ. And likewise, throughout church history, we've had the breviary, the Liturgy of the Hours. You could pray that and pray the Psalms with Christ and in Christ and through him, and find what works for you. And maybe, I don't know, I don't get a lot out of that. Okay, do some readings of the lives of the saints or read a chapter of the Gospels. Try stuff. Just go do it. I mean, that's what matters, is that you're going and making yourself available to God, and you're carving out some time to listen as well. It's not, okay, I'm going to do my rosary, I'm going to do my breviary, I'm going to do my morning offering, and then I'm done. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to do something, do listening. Of everything God the Father said, you look at the Old Testament, he gives all these commands in the Old Testament, and then in the New Testament, he actually only gives one command. There's literally, as far as I can tell, only one command by the Father in all of the pages of the New Testament, and that's when he says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." It's the only thing the Father tells us to do, listen. And so if that's the only command from the Father, we need to make time for that. And granted, most of the time the fruit of prayer isn't experienced during prayer. It's not like, oh, I got that big answer. It's creating a listening posture in our spiritual life. And a lot of times you might sit there in prayer for 5 minutes, nothing comes, but then later in the day, you're just able to listen to God better. And maybe it comes 8 hours later. Oh, yeah, maybe this is the answer to that. It's because you're kind of opening your heart to have an ear to the door. Kind of, you're like listening in on someone's conversation. You're kind of creating some quiet to be able to receive. And so start that with morning prayer, evening prayer. Do examination of conscience at the end of the day, night prayer, resolutions for the next day. Just get going. Just do it. Just carve out the time, because it's like when you fall in love with someone, at first you just bump into each other and it's exciting. But once you commit to get married, then you got to start making time. I'm going to carve out that time on Saturday to go do this. Same thing with the prayer life. You might have bumped into God at a retreat, but if you want that to deepen, you have to really be disciplined in carving out time to spend with each other.
I love that analogy. So as far as discipline goes, obviously there's a strong correlation between being able to cultivate a prayer life that is fruitful and having discipline. And even especially when you get married, as you're saying about, getting up early and all that stuff. Do you think that what do you think is that correlation there between the discipline and the prayer? Does the prayer lead to discipline? Does discipline lead to prayer? Do they develop together? What?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say it's a both and kind of relationship for sure. Because some people have a natural disposition towards discipline, where other people, their temperaments might be like, whatever. And so they might have to do a little more effort, with grace to be able to carve that out. But, prayer will make you want to pray more. And granted, people say, my prayer's so dry. Well, when I hear that, I think, okay, well, what part of your prayer is dry? Is your intercessory prayer dry? When you're praying for, the poor? Well, no, that's not dry. Okay, when you ask God for forgiveness, is that prayer dry? No. When I'm really saying sorry to God, it's not. Okay. When you're saying prayers of gratitude, is that prayer dry? No. I mean, I'm really focused there. And so you see, a lot of times dryness is because we're just kind of entering into prayer without any direction. And we're kind of just sitting there and just waiting for something to happen to us. So whether it's a good spiritual book or figuring out what type of prayer you're entering into, that a lot of times can help with the dryness in prayer. And granted, there's still going to be dark nights of the soul, and but those types of prayers are actually really pleasing to God, because it shows that you're worshiping the God of consolations. You're not worshiping the consolations of God. Because if we only go to prayer because of what we're getting out of it, then we're not really worshiping God, we're just worshiping ourselves. And so we have to make sure that we're pressing through these dry times. And with all this talk of discipline, it can seem like overly rigorous and, dry and kind of forced and white knuckled. But part of that is just being balanced. I met a priest recently, I think it was from Latin America, and the religious order that he was in, different religious orders have different constitutions that are what they focus on, whether it's education or ministry to the poor or whatever. One of the three pillars of this religious order was the exercise of the virtue of eutrapelia, which a lot of people haven't heard that word. It's it's rightly ordered recreation, which meant because they had a Friday night pizza night where they bought pizzas delivered. They were playing foosball, video games, renting movie and ping pongs. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun you guys did that. And they're like, oh yeah, that's every Friday. We have recreation with all the friars and brothers every Friday. We play together. And I thought, Matt, I bet they don't have a lot of people leaving that religious order.
I bet balanced.
Not. It isn't just work and grind and serve. It's no, I'm going to kick your butt at ping pong next Friday. I'm going to get you back for that. But this brotherly fellowship, and that's balance. That's discipline. Being able to carve out, no, we're not going to go do. We're going to spend time being brothers. We're just going to be human for a while, and we're going to laugh, and we're going to compete. That's healthy discipline. It would be very unhealthy to be no, I just got to do, and I got to produce, and I got to crank out and carve out and live this purely ascetical life. That's just a recipe for burnout, in my opinion. There's got to be balance between getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, getting enough fellowship, eating well. Do that stuff, and I think the spiritual elements is going to be a lot more natural in terms of the growth.
Beautiful. Wow, that is a really cool order. So knowing that my audience are people who are discerning marriage, so I have listeners from all over, but my target audience are people who are thinking they're going to be called to marriage and they're really trying to walk with the Lord and figure that out. So how would developing this balanced discipline, like you were just saying, how would that help someone who is in the season of life where they're still discerning?
Well, I think a lot of people get overwhelmed in the discernment process, kind of like paralysis by analysis. Okay, am I called this? Am I called that? Am I called to him? Am I called to her? And it's almost like they have a seed in their hand, and it's okay, is that an apple seed or is it an orange seed? It could be an apple seed. It looks like an orange seed. Maybe I should do a novena to see what kind of seed it is. Dude, put the dumb thing in the ground, water it, and see what sprouts up. So the most overlooked tool of discernment is action. Go on a date, go on a discernment retreat, just go, just do. Don't just sit around and discern that your whole life away. Act. Yes. And so that's a part of discipline, is choosing to do something and see what comes from it. Because I sometimes you just go on one date and it's okay, she's not the one. But if you hadn't gone on that date, you could have wondered for another 6 months if she was the one. And so in terms of action, do that. And then one other thought I'd have is a priest once said to me that the Holy Spirit talks to you 100 times a day. How often are you listening? And the reason I say that is because discernment is like this big yes that's kind of overwhelming. But if we can kind of focus on the little yeses, okay, what's the Holy Spirit asking me to do between now and 12 o'clock? Okay, well, if I get used to saying those little yeses with devotion, the big yes will totally fall into place. But if I get so overwhelmed with like, what is the answer to this big thing? We miss out living in the moment, the present moment, which is where God is encountering us on a daily basis. So have the discipline to focus on the little yeses, where he's telling you, stop looking at that stuff and now go over here and go help that person and get involved in this. Like those little yeses will lead to a very natural big yes.
Ooh, that is powerful. Thank you. Okay, so the last question that I always like to ask all of my guests is for a practical tip, because I have this same concern that you have, that the big yes is just so overwhelming. And I want people to be able to listen to these episodes and take away something very practical that they could do today. Yeah. And based on this conversation, we've talked about so many things, but based on this conversation, is there one practical tip that you would give someone who was listening to this and wanted to turn this off and take a step in the direction of saying yes to the Lord?
Yeah, well, two thoughts. One, on terms of prayer, get an app like the Hallow app. It's the number one Catholic prayer app in the world. They've got music there, liturgy. They've got so much stuff there, meditations and different Catholic personalities. If you haven't tried it out, that's really neat to check out. And so you could try the Hallow app, give that a shot. But in terms of a more broad suggestion, I would say don't be afraid of failure. Don't let fear of failure paralyze you from moving forward. And maybe failure for you, like, well, look, I'm afraid to go on that date because what if it doesn't work out? Okay, well, look, what if I ask her out and she says no? Okay, well, great. I mean, you just narrowed down your search for your future spouse by one. That's a win, all right?
Yes, well said.
Like, ask her out, and if she says yes, you get a date, and if she says no, you get clarity. Either of which is better than being uncertain and alone. And so don't let your decisions be motivated out of fear of failure, or fear of being alone. Like, I'm so afraid I'm going to stay alone, I'll just lower my morals, and that way I'll end up with a guy sooner rather than later. Don't let fear be dictating your decisions, especially when it comes to your vocation. And fear also of calling off a vocation. I did a podcast with Emily Wilson not long ago, and she's done a lot of work with engaged couples. And she said, what's interesting, she said, I've never met an engaged couple that regretted calling off their engagement. But you lose count of how many people who regret not having called it off. And so same thing with dating relationships. I mean, how many breakups do you really look back at in your life like, oh, I should have made that one last longer? It's like, no, I probably should have broken that one off sooner. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So if someone's afraid of something in this dating realm, you're saying, go for it. If there's a girl that you've been wanting to ask out or something, like, go for it.
Just go for it. Just do it. Like they say, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the judgment something's more important than your fear. And so it's okay to feel afraid. Okay, that you can't have courage without the feeling of fear. I mean, you think the men who like stormed the beaches of Normandy were like, I'm not afraid. It's like, no, they're like, no, I'm probably going to go meet God on that beach in about 2.5 minutes. They had plenty of fear on those boats approaching the shores of France, but they had a lot more courage than fear.
Your one-liners are my favorite. I've lost track of how many awesome one-liners you have said. Thank you.
Well, not to compare asking girls out to storming the beaches of Normandy, because hopefully your chances are better than that. But, you got to just go.
But even if they're not, you're choosing something more than your fear, and it's worth it to figure out if that girl is it. So go for it.
So you're saying there's a chance. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This conversation has been so beautiful, and I have gained so much from it as well, as I'm sure my listeners have. So thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be on.
All right. And all of you, thank you so much for giving us your time. We know your time is so precious. There are so many things competing for it. And I am so grateful that you wanted to spend this time with us today. So until next time, stay close to the heart of Jesus and be not afraid. Bye.